For a president of the United States to be gunned down in the streets of a major city, the conspirators had to both control the crime scene and then initiate a cover-up. And the Warren Commission was established for just that reason, to try and convince a shaken and grieving nation that what we just saw with our own eyes didn't happen. But it did happen. The most popular and effective president the country had seen for generations was murdered right before our eyes. And if we look hard enough, the evidence to solve the case of who shot him becomes clear. Much of it is right in front of our eyes. Let's look in rough chronological order. We know shots came from at least two directions, and probably more. There had to be spotters and communications. And right where the triangulation of fire will take President Kennedy's life, look who we find. A man with a radio communicating to the shooting teams, and another man signaling those shooters with an umbrella. Both men perform strange actions just as Kennedy's limousine approaches them. In the aftermath of the assassination, the men will sit down on the side next to each other before getting up and walking in opposite directions. The fact that both men sat there so calmly after the shooting raises suspicion. But look closer. The so-called dark-complected man talks on a walkie-talkie while he is sitting. He is also seen placing the walkie-talkie into his pocket and under his shirt. He had to be talking to the comm leader for the shooter teams. That was textbook CIA operation. And no one with an ounce of common sense can believe that Lewis Witt really was signaling with that umbrella because of some ridiculous 1930s Neville Chamberlain reference. Witt, the self-proclaimed umbrella man, worked for Rio Grande National Life Insurance in the Rio Grande building. That was the same building that housed the immigration office frequented by Lee Harvey Oswald, and also the local office of the negligent Secret Service. And who were they communicating to? 15 minutes before the assassination, a slew of witnesses saw two men in the Texas School Book Depository on the 6th floor with a rifle. It's almost inconceivable that none of these witnesses will be called by the Warren Commission. Ruby Henderson heard 4 shots and saw 2 men in the book depository 6th floor window as the motorcade reached the corner of Elm and Houston. She told the FBI and was not called by the Warren Commission. Mrs. Carolyn Arnold saw 2 men with a rifle, one wearing a brown suit coat, as the motorcade approached Houston Street. She told the FBI, but was not called by the Warren Commission. John Powell, a prisoner at the Dallas County Jail, also on the 6th floor across from the book depository, and many other inmates, clearly saw 2 men in what they called the assassin's 6th floor window. They said they were adjusting the telescopic sight of a rifle, and one of the men appeared to be Latin. And Mr. and Mrs. Arnold Roland saw 2 men with a rifle and told Dallas Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig.
My interest was to get behind that picket fence because that's where that Dallas police officer was headed. And he was in the motorcade. He was a traffic officer. I worked in that area for, probably 7, 8 minutes, maybe, something like that, until I ran on to Mr. and Mrs. Arnold Roland. Now, Mr. Roland told me that 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, he saw 2 men on the 6th floor of the school book depository. Now, one was a white male in the east corner of the 6th floor with a rifle. The other one was a colored male at the west end of the 6th floor, pacing back and forth.
Well, I saw this man in the window, and he had a gun in his hands pointed downward. The man evidently was in a kneeling position because his forearms were resting on the window sill. There was another man standing beside him, but I only saw a portion of his body because he was standing partly against, behind the window, only halfway.
Of incredible importance is the testimony of Miss Carolyn Arnold, who worked in the Texas School Book Depository. She walked into the second-floor lunchroom at 12:25 p.m. as she was headed out to see the motorcade, 5 minutes before the shots rang out, and she saw Lee Oswald sitting right where building manager Roy Truly and Dallas policeman Marion Baker would see him 2 to 3 minutes after the shots. Ms. Arnold confirms here to news reporters that she saw Oswald at 12:25 p.m., but she will not be called before the Warren Commission. The Commission will erroneously report that no one saw Oswald after 11:55 a.m. Eugene Hale Brading was a criminal with over 35 convictions by the time he and another man named Morgan Brown would check into Suite 301 of the Cabana Motel on Stemmons Freeway in Dallas the day before the assassination. Reportedly, Jack Ruby was a visitor to see Brading there. What we are sure of is that Brading was arrested in the Daltex building overlooking Dilly Plaza for acting suspiciously right after the assassination. He lied and gave his name as Jim Braden and said he was making a phone call. Brading was let go. Unbelievable. How difficult would it have been to really check who he was if the Dallas police or FBI really wanted to? Brading will later submit an affidavit claiming that he was visiting Haroldson Hunt on oil business. It is reported that Ruby was also at Hunt's office at the same time. What oil business would a career criminal and mafia henchman be doing other than participating in the assassination? 5 years later, Brading will turn up in Los Angeles on the night that Robert Kennedy is killed. Others arrested in the Daltex building right after the assassination, including one man with black leather jacket and gloves, will simply be allowed to walk away. Many people interested in the JFK assassination have seen Mark Lane's interviews with the people who heard shots and saw smoke from the grassy knoll. I think they are some of the most convincing evidence of conspiracy.
The first two shots I didn't realize what they were, but the third shot, after it was fired, I heard Mrs. Kennedy scream, "Oh no, they've shot Jack," and it was just sort of sent a chill over you. It was just terrible.
I can remember seeing the side of the president's ear and head come off. I remember a flash of white and the red and just bits and pieces of flesh exploding from the president's head. At that time, I turned to Gail and said, "That's it, hit the ground." And we turned and hit the ground and covered our children. But when the third shot was fired, I thought it came from directly behind, towards the grassy knoll behind me. I was interviewed by the FBI, but I did not testify before the Warren Commission.
As the presidential limousine was rounding the curve on Elm Street, there was a loud explosion. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot. And it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees on the embankment. I was talking with a patrolman Foster at the time, and as soon as we heard the shots, we ran around to the wooden fence.
Were you subsequently questioned by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
About a month later, I was questioned by the FBI.
Did you tell them what you told me and what you told the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir, I wasn't. Well, we all four seen about the same thing as the shots. The smoke came from behind the hedge.
Looked over to where I thought the shot came from. And I saw a puff of smoke still lingering underneath the trees in front of the wooden fence. And this is where I saw the smoke from the third shot.
The Warren Commission published just a very small portion of your testimony and used your testimony as proof that no shots could have come from behind the fence. Did they accurately and fairly use your testimony?
They are wrong, because my testimony, and I made it very clear, that there was a fourth shot fired, and one of those shots came from behind that picket fence.
You were a ranger during the war, correct?
Yes, sir, I was a ranger during the war. Took part in the invasion of France and was shot a couple of times, so as I say, it's possibly like swimming. I hadn't heard that sound for many a year, but you don't forget it once you've heard a shot rounding, coming close to you.
Did you make a statement to the Dallas Sheriff's Office?
Yes, I did.
How long did you remain in the Dallas Sheriff's Office that day?
I would say about 3 hours to 4 hours.
Were you among the closest witnesses to the limousine when the shot struck the president?
Yes, sir, I would have to say that if not the closest, one of the closest to the unfortunate incident. I did get a view of something I'll never forget.
Were you called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, I was not called by the Warren Commission to testify.
Mr. Bowers, how many shots did you hear?
There were 3 shots, and these were spaced with 1 shot, then a pause, and then 2 shots in very close order, such as perhaps almost on top of each other, while there was some pause between the first and the second shots.
Did you tell that to the Dallas police?
Yes, I told this to the police, and then also told it to the FBI, and also I had a discussion 2 or 3 days later with them concerning this, and they made no comment other than the fact that when I stated I felt like the second and third shots could not have been fired from the same rifle, they reminded me that I wasn't an expert, and I had to agree.
In reading your testimony, Mr. Bowers, it appears that just as you were about to make that statement, you were interrupted in the middle of the sentence by the commission counsel, who then went into another area.
Well, that's correct. I was there only to tell them what they asked, and so that when they seemed to want to cut off the conversation, I felt like that was, as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it.
Again, how could the Warren Commission or any other investigative body not call these witnesses in the assassination of a president of the United States, unless they really did not want their testimony? Next in our chronology of eyewitnesses is of extreme importance. It is the fact that Dallas police and other witnesses were immediately stopped by men with Secret Service credentials, halting them from trying to get behind the grassy knoll and the Texas School Book Depository. There were no real Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza. They were all in the motorcade. Right after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, many people thought at least one or more of those shots came from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. Some saw a puff of gun smoke, and some who ran up the knoll smelled gunpowder. Dallas police officer Joe Marshall Smith wasn't sure where the shots came from, but he immediately had a woman tugging on his arm, saying that they are shooting the president from the bushes on the knoll. Officer Smith ran up the small hill, past the fence, and into the parking lot by the railroad yards. Smith had his gun drawn and pointed it at a man there. The man pulled out Secret Service credentials from his hip pocket, which Officer Smith recognized as being real, and so continued on. As confirmed by the Warren Commission, there were no real Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza at that time. They were all in the motorcade and headed to Parkland Hospital with the president. Officer Smith will later recount that the credentials looked real, but the man he encountered didn't look like a Secret Service agent. He had on a sports shirt and had dirty hands, looking more like an auto mechanic. Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman and others will report being stopped by men with Secret Service credentials, both in the Grassy Knoll area and by the Texas School Book Depository. Deputy Weissman reported to the Warren Commission that he met up with Secret Service agents behind the wall that adjoined the stockade fence and said he turned over to one of the Secret Service men what he believed to be a portion of the president's skull that he had found on Elm Street. Hoffman then saw a police officer come quickly around the fence and confronted the suit man. The suit man held out his empty hands and pulled ID from his coat pocket to show the officer. That officer was almost certainly Joe Marshall Smith. It is clear that the assassins controlled the crime scene by placing fake Secret Service agents and fake policemen behind the knoll and in the area of the school book depository. Next in our eyewitness accounts is why were Dallas police officer eyewitness accounts of the Mauser rifle changed or disbelieved?
Mauser German-made rifle with the sniper scope sights that was found on the German-built Mauser with the sniper scope that was used to kill President Kennedy.
7.65 Mauser, German rifle, familiar to those who served in World War II.
Place. It's a 7.65 Mauser, German-made Army rifle, telescopic sight, and one shell left in the chamber. 3 spent shells have been found nearby, and apparently they're hooking this as the murder weapon.
Sniper scope, high-powered Mauser
The Dallas
rifle.
Sheriff's Department said the rifle had been found in a staircase on the 5th floor of a building near the scene of the assassination. It was a 7.65 Mauser.
A German Mauser, I believe.
There's another word that a Mauser has been found.
Mauser.
Oswald worked in the building where the murder weapon, a German-made Mauser rifle, was
one still found in the Mauser with which the assassin was apparently armed.
And we began then to search for a weapon. And we started toward, everybody took a different direction, and Deputy Sheriff Boone and myself just happened to head for the northwest corner of the building. And Boone was ahead of me by about 8 feet. And there were a stack of boxes just at the head of the stairwell going downstairs. And Boone looked over into it and said, "Here it is. Here's the rifle." So I immediately went over beside him and looked over, and there was a rifle. But we didn't touch it until Captain Fritz and Lieutenant Day from the ID department of the Dallas Police Department got there. Now, Captain Fritz was chief of homicide, and Lieutenant Day was from the Identification Bureau. They got there and took some pictures of the rifle, and then I believe Dave pulled the rifle out and handed it to Captain Fritz, who held it up by the, had a strap on it. He held it up by the strap and asked if anyone knew what kind of rifle it was. Well, by this time, Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman had joined us. And Weitzman was a gun buff. He had a sporting goods store at one time, and he was very good with weapons. And he said it looks like a Mauser, and he walked over to Fritz, and Captain Fritz was holding the rifle up in the air, and I was standing next to Weitzman, who was standing next to Fritz, and we weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches from the rifle, and stamped right on the barrel of the rifle was 7.65 Mauser. And that's when Weitzman said it is a Mauser and pointed to the 7.65 Mauser stamp on the barrel.
Why did Dallas Police Captain William Westbrook have a fake Oswald wallet in his possession that he pulled out at the Tippett crime scene if he wasn't trying to plant evidence? The second wallet will simply disappear. And why was Westbrook never investigated for his actions all through the assassination day? Westbrook returned to 10th and Patton and pretended to receive the wallet from Crury and discover Oswald's ID as well as that of Alex Cadell. Westbrook would then wait for the first report of a suspicious man at the Texas Theater and rush there to be first in. He carried a shotgun and no doubt planned to do everything he could to finish off the real Oswald. Next in our eyewitness trust your eyes account is testimony of a woman, one of many people who saw two shooters at the murder scene of Officer Tippett.
November 22nd, 1963.
I was working for Miss Smotherman, 327 East 10th, just down the block from where Tippett was killed.
Did you know Officer Tippett?
Yes, I saw him pretty many times.
And did you hear the shots?
Yes, I heard the shots.
And what did you do?
I ran out into the street and looked down the street, and I ran back down the street where he was lying, and I looked at him.
Now, when you heard the shots and you went out of the house, did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He's kind of heavy. He wasn't a very big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he's kind of short guy.
Short and heavy?
Yes.
And was there any other man there?
Yes, there's one on the other side of the street. All I know, he told him to go.
Mrs. Clemens, the man who had the gun, did he make any motion at all to the other man across the street?
No more told him to go.
Well, he waved his hand and said, go on.
Go.
And then what happened with the man with the gun?
He unloaded and reloaded.
And what did the other man do?
Man kept going straight down the street.
And then did they go in opposite directions?
Yes, they was. They wasn't together. They went this way from each other. The one done the shooting went this way. The other went straight down past street that way.
What was the man who did not do the shooting, but the man who went in the other direction from the man with the gun? What was he wearing, if you remember?
Well, first I remember he looked like light khakis and a white shirt.
And was he tall or short?
He was tall.
And was he heavy or thin?
He was thin.
But the one who had the gun, seconds after Tippett was shot, he was short.
Yes,
he
he was short and kind of heavy.
Now, did you testify before the Warren Commission about this case?
I haven't said anything to anyone.
Did anyone come to see you after the murder of Officer Tippett?
Yes, he was a man came, I don't know what he was. He came to my house and talked to me. But I don't know what he looked like a policeman to me.
He did. Did he have a gun?
Yes, he wore a gun.
Mrs. Clemens, how long after Tippett was shot did this man with a gun come to visit you?
About 2 days. It was about 2 days. Said that I might get hurt. Someone might hurt me if I would talk.
About what you saw?
What I saw. He just told me to be the best if I didn't say anything because I might get hurt.
Finally, listen to the eyewitnesses who confirmed that Jack Ruby stalked Oswald all weekend long and actually tried to get out of murdering him. There were a lot of panicked people the weekend Kennedy was murdered. The conspirators almost certainly had planned for Oswald to be killed either in the Texas School Book Depository or in the Texas Theater. Ruby was a longtime organized crime associate and gun runner to Cuba, and he was everywhere the weekend of November 22nd. Julie Ann Mercer will identify a picture of Ruby on Saturday, the day before Oswald was shot, as the man she saw driving a truck dropping off two men with a rifle by the grassy knoll about an hour before the assassination. The Warren Commission will blatantly misrepresent Mercer's testimony, including the description of the truck she described. Ruby will be at Parkland Hospital, talking to National Scripps Howard reporter Seth Cantor shortly after Kennedy and Connolly arrived.
Just after I entered, there was a group of nurses and doctors standing around with a lot of concern, and Jack Ruby came up to me. He said something to the effect that, "Isn't this just terrible?" And he looked as if he was extremely distressed. I shook hands with him, and I had known him previously, and Ruby asked me what I thought about his closing his places of business for a day or two out of concern for what had happened. And I told him I thought that was a good idea and to please excuse me, I had to go on. I guess that encounter with Ruby took maybe 25, 30 seconds. It was very clear to me who I had talked to and who I had called by name and who had called me by name and who I had shaken hands with and everything. But when the Warren Commission report came out, they said that probably under the stress of everything that was going on, that I most likely was confused and that I talked to Ruby at the police station several hours later. I was dismayed when I picked up my copy of the Warren Commission report and discovered what they had decided about my testimony. And among other things, I immediately began to wonder, who else they had talked to, who they chose not to believe, and why.
Ruby was seen trying to enter the room where Oswald was being questioned in Dallas Police Headquarters. He will be seen in the hallways multiple times, and Ruby will be photographed standing with reporters at Henry Wade's famous midnight news conference, and even corrected Wade when he was trying to remember the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Ruby will then make call after call to police and FBI officials warning of the plot to shoot Oswald during the transfer the next morning.
I thought I recognized the voice, but at the same time I could not put a face or a name with the voice. And as we talked, he began telling me that we needed to change the plans on moving Oswald from the basement, that he knew of the plans to make the move, and if we did not make a change, the statement he made precisely was, "We are going to kill him." No sooner than I turned it on and they were telling that Jack Ruby had killed Oswald, then I suddenly realized, knowing Jack Ruby the way I did, this was the man I was talking to on the phone last night. At that time, I put the voice with the face, and I knew within myself that Jack Ruby is the one that made that call to me the night before. And I think it was obvious because he knew me and I knew him, and he called me by name over the telephone. And seeing this and knowing what I knew and what he had said, then to me it had to be Jack Ruby. He made the statement, "We are going to kill him," which leads me to believe that this was not a spontaneous thing that happened on the spur of the moment. He was watching Oswald coming out the door and all of a sudden he decided to shoot him. I do not believe that. I think this was a planned event with him being the man to do the shooting.
One question, Mr. Shanklin. You said you were taking a shower on Saturday night and you got a phone call from someone telling you that they were going to try and kill Lee Harvey Oswald. Could you tell me who that phone call was from?
The office got the call. I'd gone home at about 11 and I was trying to take a shower, and this is the first time I'd had any chance. This Saturday.
Right.
I came on back down because they couldn't get the police chief. And I came on back, and then I finally got in touch with the deputy chief, and I said I want to talk to Chief Curry. And finally, at about 8 o'clock the next morning, they got him. And I told him that I wanted to report this directly to him. And he said, well, he had everything taken care of. He had 2 armored trucks.
You were never able to determine who the call had come from?
No,
it
was an anonymous call. It came into the clerk that was operating the switchboard. The same call I later found out, or probably the same individual, called the sheriff's office.
Ruby had obviously been given orders to kill Oswald, and he did not want to do it. The Warren Commission will state that Ruby came down the main rampway to the basement no more than 3 minutes before shooting Oswald. That was denied by at least 10 eyewitnesses. Most likely he was admitted by a back stairwell, assisted by at least 1 Dallas police officer.